Rebirth, more like regirth. I've been seeing this Batman come up in conversation within the comment section and within other people that I've been talking to as far as McFarlane Batmans are concerned. And finally, I'm here to cover it. It is DC Rebirth Batman. This is actually one of the more newer waves of the McFarlane Toys Batmans that have been coming out. And when I saw this guy prop up online, I was like, yeah, I actually do like the very clean aesthetic look of this particular Batman. Let's go ahead, ship it in, cover it, and see what it's all about. However, there's one little detail within this figure that kind of makes me think that there's a widespread issue within McFarlane as far as the Batman that they've been putting out recently that gives me a little bit of concern, but it's also not the biggest problem in the world. In fact, there's probably been bigger issues with McFarlane Toys in the past rather than this particular one. In fact, some people might like this little quality to be found here within this McFarlane. But first, before I get to that, let me just cover the overall look of this DC Rebirth Batman, which is going for a much, I guess you could almost argue, a leaner physique. He's not necessarily meant to be this like bulky, stocky Batman that's supposed to be like this giant weightlifter. He's got a much slender build, but still not without his fair share of muscle. I will say that it's his look that, again, it's mainly designed to be covered in this new aesthetic of Batman where he's mostly gray, but you can see kind of like the inverse of the bat symbol, which I really do like. I just think that the black could have been painted just a little, just filled in a little bit more amongst the bat symbol, especially around the ears area. I felt like the paint kind of ran out a little bit there towards the top there. But again, I'm slightly nitpicking there only because of my OCD. Otherwise, though, the actual look of this Batman is pretty dope, actually. I really do like the clean look. I like the utility belt, and like I said, I like the slimmer model after his physique in terms of, you know, musculature and detail, and he actually feels quality as far as the actual design of the figure and the actual construction of the figure. I'll probably say the only thing that to me I don't know how to feel about, not necessarily in any kind of positive or negative manner, but I will probably say the cowl. The cowl itself is cool looking. It's just that, mimicking the style of a much slender Batman, he also has a much slender kind of look to his face. It looks like, you know, you're so accustomed to seeing a Batman fill in the mask, especially with a very powerful jawline, that with this guy who's got more of a rounded kind of chiseling around his chin, you know, it's a little bit more rounded, a little bit more full, that, you know what it reminds me of as far as facial construction and facial molding is concerned? It makes it look like Jeremy Strong. Jeremy Strong, if you guys are huge fans of Succession, it looks like they cast Jeremy Strong as Batman here, which is maybe not necessarily the worst thing ever. I mean, he's actually a pretty good actor, so I just saying that there's something about the way that this face is molded. It just looks like a Jeremy Strong is filling in the cowl this time around. But otherwise, though, I do like I said, some of the aesthetic choices that they got going on right here. A much more rigid cape that is strictly molded in this fashion to the point where, you know, yeah, it is made out of rubber. You can see me kind of creasing it here, but in terms of these creases and molds that they made out here towards the end and outside portions of the cape, it's actually made out of much thicker rubber that pulling him out of the box was actually kind of a chore, but not in the worst way possible. In fact, I will probably pay compliments to this figure as far as having the rigidness of this cape that doesn't feel like it's gonna weather or tear anytime soon. In fact, I will gladly take this over that of the Zur-En-Arrh Batman that had the much thinner cape that could be prone to ripping and tearing with the slightest bit of a cut or a lesion amongst the sides of the cape. So I like the rigidness of this one. Don't know how I feel about the purple on the inside, but at the same time, it does complement the very bright yellow amongst the bat symbol and, like I mentioned before, the utility belt. One thing that caught me by surprise, that I was like, you know what? I was feeling a little off about it when I pulled them out of the package, but over time, I actually grew to love, is actually the gauntlets. You're usually accustomed to having the spikes on his gauntlets be a little bit more protruding out to kind of give it that much more Batman look, to a quality look to him. However, this time around with this version of DC Rebirth Batman, the actual spikes on his gauntlets are a bit more curved and kind of they're kind of molded to be smoother on the outside, and therefore they don't really have that rigidness or that spikiness. And from a Batman perspective, that's a little different than what you're usually used to, but this is meant to be Rebirth Batman, a complete revitalization of the character with a much slender look, and that's, again, carried on over to the gauntlets or to the more Batman-y kind of qualities of the costume. And from a collector standpoint, I actually like these gauntlets in the sense that they're less prone to warping, because if they were sticking out a little bit more, they would be much easier to warp, and therefore, because they're already curved, they actually feel a little bit better amongst the fingers whenever kind of handling the figure or moving about the arms, as well as practically posing him next to any other figure, so you don't have to really worry about him bumping into any other Batman or pressing up against a surface and warping those gauntlets, because they're already going to be flushed in. So I actually like that little perspective. And the gauntlets, again, still have this clean, very simplistic look. I'm a little... I don't know how to feel about the little bat symbols or the bat heads on his knee pads. I do think that that's probably the only thing as far as the costume is concerned that I personally would have changed, but they don't necessarily break the design of the figure either. You know what I'm saying? I'm not like boycotting the knee pads, knee pad gate. I would sooner boycott the thighs. This is the detail that I looked at and went, okay, McFarlane, what's going on? What's your fascination with this thick daddy thighs? Which normally I really wouldn't complain or have an issue with too strongly, except I just mentioned that this is a much slimmer take on the actual physique of Batman from what we're usually accustomed to. So from almost any angle that I tried to give it a chance with, these thighs I personally feel a little disproportionate as far as looking at the bottom body versus the top body. I mean, really look at him hard, and you'll see what I'm talking about. One of his thighs is the size of almost his torso. I mean, look at how crazy that is. And that's funny because, like I said, as far as the actual look and design of this Batman, he is near perfect, except for the swollen thighs. I understand you mustn't skip leg day, but this, right after coming off of Zurinar Batman, who also has Mac Daddy thighs with bow-leggedness around on the shin area and the calf area, it's starting to make me wonder, like, are we going to start to get Thigh-gate here? Are we going to start getting Thunder thighs all over our McFarlane figures, despite how disproportionate it may come off? Like, for a version of Batman like Dark Knight Returns Batman, it completely makes sense because he's meant to be a much more hulky looking Batman physique. But when it comes to a revitalization of the character like Rebirth Batman here, these thighs to me just stand out a little too strongly, that if they had just pulled the scale a little bit on these thighs, Kaya, I would probably say this would be a damn near perfect looking Batman that's albeit a much more unique Batman than what I'm used to, but in a welcoming way. The articulation is also damn near perfect as well. The head traditionally rotates 360 degrees, so it's doing a pretty good bang up job there. It pivots up very well, but it doesn't really crunch in as much as I would want it to. I would probably say just a degree or two inwards would be a little bit nicer, but again, that's just a matter of preference. Nothing too hindering there. It's once we get to the shoulders that we get our first and possibly only miss, really, in my book, and that's the shoulder joint, because traditionally what I like to do here is rotate it 360 degrees vertically, but unfortunately, because of the stylistic choices of going along with the very rigid cape here, which is actually made out of a solid piece encroaching the shoulders here and kind of adjusted to the shoulders via an adhesive that's strongly put there, it's not going to be able to do the full 360 vertical rotation. It stops fully right about right there, which is predominantly a huge issue with a lot of McFarlane Batmans, obviously because of the cape. And not every single cape is going to be as strongly put as this one. So sadly, you're only going to be able to get movement about that far upwards. Once we get to extensions, it's a lot more generous. You actually have a ratcheted joint, allowing extension horizontally all the way up to right about right there on both arms. The one on my right is a little looser. You can kind of see right there, it's moving up and down on the extension joints much more freely, but the left one is full on ratcheted and much more rigid, so therefore it's probably just an isolated event on my particular unit here. And then of course you do have your natural bicep swivel that allows rotation fully 360 degrees in place. Two joints at the elbow allow full bending all the way up on both arms, so nothing intrusive there, still fulfilling that movement as well. And then of course the wrist joints that allow full 360 degrees horizontally, as well as slight pivoting inwards and outwards, mainly because of the way that the gauntlet is molded. However, there is still that little guard that's supposed to protect the wrist, but unfortunately, if you have the joint in the wrong angle, that could get in the way of that horizontal cut, which is kind of the case on my left fisted hand. But on the right one, that's meant to hold one of his accessories, which we'll cover momentarily, is kind of up against perpendicular to the guard, so therefore it's able to move up and down much more freely, as you can see right there. Then we get to the torso, which is very curious because pulling him out of the box, I noticed that he was in a very kind of slumped over kind of way because of the way that his torso really is designed with, again, like I mentioned, the slimmer look. It looked like he was kind of hunched over. It looks like he activated his very own shrimp mode, like a lot of us gamers like to do in our gaming chairs, which is why we probably have bad backs. But with some finessing with the torso joints, I noticed that I was able to get it a bit more flush and symmetrical here amongst the oblique area and the abdominal area, that he definitely looked a lot more cleaner and simplistic, but very aesthetically pleasing. Like, I like all the gray and the padding going on right here. As soon as you get these joints it kind of stabilized, especially both the mid and waist, because you actually get double joints right here. You get, of course, the mid torso cut that allows full 360 rotation, but something that I've been noticing, I kind of sense this a little bit with Rebirth Batman, but here in DC Rebirth, it's definitely coming across much more predominantly that the joint inside of the torso also has kind of like this flexing thing going on in the middle. It's very hard to describe, but you notice that when I rotate, a little bit of this is protruding out, this part right here, and it looks super awkward. But if you press it, it'll actually just flush right in. So it's almost like it was stuck in this position and it looks like it's at risk of breaking, but all you have to do is really give it a press and it'll just kind of flush back inwards, almost like it's got its own mechanism inside of this top joint that allows it to flush a little better and be much more flexible. So it's cool to see McFarlane's incorporate this particular joint, and because of that, I'm like, you know what, if more McFarlane's are going to be able to include this, I'm all for it. I'm actually pretty down with it. But as you can see, it allows full rotation 360 degrees, flexing inwards and backwards because of that flexible joint, as well as crunching from left to right. So it's very, very welcoming, very flexible. But what also helps is a waist joint that allows full 360 degrees as well. So throwing in that double decker of joints very, very much complements the slender physique, and it makes sense. And before we move away from the top body, I apologize, I completely forgot about the butterfly joints, which are still found inside of the shoulders because, like I mentioned before, flexing them and rotating them vertically is almost not existent because of the way that the cape is constructed, but you are still able to create some slight shrugging motion due to the butterfly joints. They're just not as flexible as I found in other McFarlane's because, again, that cape is just a tiny bit intrusive on that joint. Moving on to the thunder thighs, as I mentioned before, you are able to flex them about that far forward and that much back like most traditional McFarlane's, as well as being able to extend very, very generously, right about right there, thanks to that McFarlane joint in the middle, thanks to also the flexible crotch piece that allows that movement to be possible. But then, of course, you have the double joints behind the bat-headed knee pads that I'm a little on the fence of, but you are nevertheless able to flex the legs all the way back like so. No real swivel movement found in the thighs of any kind, but moving on down to the bottom of the boots, you do get a joint that allows the ankles to rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to pivot downwards about that far and then upwards about that much. And of course, you cannot forget the traditional toesies found within the boots. So yes, very similarly to the overall design of this particular Batman figure, that articulation is damn near perfect as well. If it wasn't for the intruded shoulders that aren't able to move all the way around. But then again, when it comes to certain figures, it's not necessary. I understand that, it's not necessarily a make or break deal. I just wish it was there. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just wish that the option was there. And frankly, apart from the vertical rotation, I do wish that the butterfly joints were a bit more, how do you say it, maybe a little bit more expressive, because obviously with this cape kind of covering in on the shoulder action, a little bit of that shrugging, a little bit of that pivoting with the butterfly joint, which is one of my favorite joints within McFarlane's, being kind of cut out of the picture, it bumps me out a little bit, but at least it's able to make up with in a very generous mid-torso joint that I'm a huge fan of. So very good to see that come to fruition there. Now he does come with a couple of accessories, one of which is a batarang that he's able to hold in arguably the only hand that's designed to hold anything. And the batarang is interesting because, frankly, upon looking at it closely, it's pretty much a black piece cut out of the same exact design as his chest symbol. In fact, you can literally hold it above his chest symbol. It's literally the exact same cutout. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they just kind of reused the same thing to etch out the chest symbol for the actual figure, except with a different filament to then create the batarang. But nevertheless, he is able to hold it in the right hand because it's the only one molded to be able to do so. So you have that there. But if you so choose to give him a much more actionable accessory, he does come with a grapple gun, which is very traditional for Batman. In fact, it's rather designed and with a very familiar kind of aesthetic. In fact, it reminds me almost most of either the Arkham series grapple guns, or if you want to throw it all the way back, the original Keaton 89 Bat grapple, especially with the grip kind of design that he's got going on right there. My only little beef or nitpick, I would say, is that I really do wish that there was something a bit more actionable with the grapple here at the front, apart from just having these hooks here. Maybe if it was like coiling out like I've seen other McFarlane's do, or if it was, I would even say go the extra mile and actually have it be a replaceable or ejectable piece, you know, not necessarily spring loaded or anything like that, but just something that you can kind of take in and out so that you can sport them looking with the grapple by itself, like in a stable kind of state, or if it's actually shooting one out, or, you know, just kind of have it be, like I said, a little bit more customizable in that sense. But there you have DC Rebirth Batman, and I get it. I really do get it. After finally toying with the figure myself, I definitely understand where all those comments are coming from as far as this figure ranking in those folks' top 5, despite it not making my top 5, frankly because I just didn't manage to cover him in time. And now, if we were to be looking at a future top 5 or potentially top 10 McFarlane ranking, I would probably say DC Rebirth Batman might have a shot of maybe not necessarily making that top 5 because of, again, my nitpicks with the thunder thighs, as well as maybe one additional accessory would have been welcome, or the articulation being a bit more flex amongst the shoulder area. But I will definitely say if I were to expand the rankings to potentially be a top 10 rather than a top 5, oh yeah, DC Rebirth Batman will more than likely make the cut, because if it wasn't for those nitpicks, goddamn, this would be a near perfect McFarlane Toys Batman, if I do say so myself. And as such, I fully recommend them, and if you guys are enticed to add DC Rebirth Batman to your McFarlane collection, be sure to use the affiliate links in the description below. It helps out the channel quite a bit. Otherwise, I thank you guys so much for watching. Check out this other McFarlane Toy review if you want to see more, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next video.